El Enmascarado de Plata, the Silver Masked Man. This is the Grapple Show, episode 78, El Santo. Ladies and gentlemen, grapplers and dreamers, welcome back to the Grapple Show, where we journey across the grappling multiverse to uncover legends, myths, and warriors who shaped combat sports history. Tonight, we travel south to the land of Lucha Libre, mystery, monsters, and masks. We step into a world where wrestling isn't just a sport, it isn't just entertainment, it's a whole mythology. Because our subject tonight wasn't merely a wrestler. He wasn't merely a movie star. He wasn't merely a cultural icon. He was all three at once. Tonight, we explore the incredible story of El Santo, the Silver Masked Man, a man who wrestled in packed arenas before thousands of screaming fans, a man who battled vampires, mummies, gangsters, mad scientists, and a whole lot more on the silver screen. A man whose image became so powerful that he transcended wrestling itself and became a national hero. For generations of Mexicans, El Santo stood for justice, courage, and honor and hope. His silver mask became as recognizable as Superman's cape, Batman's scowl, and Zorro's black mask and said sword. But behind the mask was a real man, a man who lived a life filled with sacrifice and discipline, fame, and mystery. How did a young wrestler become the great cultural icon of Lucha Libre? How did a masked grappler become a cinematic superhero before superhero films even existed? And why, decades and decades after his death, does El Santo remain one of the most beloved figures in the entire history of wrestling? Tonight we'll explore the legend, we'll explore the man, and we will discover why the silver mask still shines brightly across the world of wrestling. This is the story of a wrestler who became immortal. This is the story of El Santo. Welcome to the Grapple Right Show. I'm your host, Brett Summers, and as I say, we are looking at El Santo tonight, the Lucha Libre legend, arguably the most famous Mexican who ever lived. Now, let's backtrack that to the beginning of the tale then. Rodolfo Guzman Huerta was born on September the 23rd, 1917, in Tulancingo in the Mexican state of Hidalgo. He then moved to Mexico City in the 1920s, where his family settled in Tepito neighborhood. He practiced baseball and American football and then became interested in wrestling. He first learned jiu-jitsu and then he moved on to the classical wrestling, which he would become more and more famous for as time went on. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Accounts vary to exactly where and when he first wrestled competitively. It was either in the Arena Peralvillo Cojumal on the 28th of June 1934, or it was in Deportivo Islas in the Guerrero colony of Mexico City in 1935. You can argue that amongst yourselves. Historians are still trying to pin that down. Leave a comment, leave a mark if you've got any more info on that, because more and more things come out as time goes on. So maybe we can finally answer that question. If you know, let me know and I'll appreciate it. But anyway, the one thing that was definitely for certain is that by the end of the 1930s, he had become established in the world of professional wrestling. He had wrestled under the names Rudy Guzman, El Hombre Rojo, El Dimino Negro, El Murcielago 2. Now, this back two thing caused a little bit of a stir because it was already the name of a famous wrestler, Jesse Velasquez. And he made an appeal to the Mexican Boxing and Wrestling Commission, and they were the regulatory body and they made a ruling that Guzman could not use the name. But it did not matter though, as he would soon select a name that would allow the Mexican luchador to transcend wrestling and become a huge film star, comic book sensation, folk icon, and symbol of justice for the common man. In 1942, Rodolfo's manager, Don Jesus Lamilli, was putting together a new team of wrestlers, all dressed in silver, and he wanted Rodolfo to be part of it. Now, he suggested three names. There was El Santo, the saint, El Diablo, the devil, and El Angel, the angel. And Rodolfo chose the first one, and the rest was history. And then on the 26th of June, at the age of 24 years old, he wrestled at the Arena Mexico for the first time as El Santo. Although he later was simply known as Santo under his new name, he quickly found his style and developed his character. One of Santo's greatest matches was in 1952, where he fought a tag team known as Los Hermanos Shadows, which consisted of the famous luchadors Blue Demon and the Black Shadow. Santo beat an unmasked Black Shadow in the ring, which triggered Blue Demon's decision to become a technical, a good guy, as well as igniting a legendary feud between Blue Demon and Santo that then culminated in Santo's defeat in a well publicized series of matches in 1952 and again in 1953. Although they appeared together in a number of action adventure films, their rivalry never really ended, and in later years, Santo always remembered his defeat at Blue Demon's hands, and it was something that would come back, and storylines would go back to it and go back to it, and even carry it across generations. In 1952, the artist and editor Jose G. Cruz started a Santo comic book, turning Santo into the first and foremost character in Mexican popular literature. His popularity only rivaled the legendary Caliman character. The Santo comic book series, 4 different volumes, ran continuously for 35 years, ending in 1987. That's 1952 to 1987. That's just a comic book run. If anyone's got any of those, I'd like to share them. We've got any images, please, copy below, send them in. We would love to see some of those. And also in 1952, a superhero motion picture serial was made entitled The Man in the Silver Mask, which was supposed to star our hero El Santo. But he declined to appear in it because he thought it would fail commercially. He was getting very protective of his image. The film was made instead with well-known luchador El Medico Asesino in the lead role, excuse my pronunciation. And he was wearing a white mask similar to Santo's silver one. A villain named the Silver Mask Man was introduced into the plot at the last minute. Thus, the title of the film strangely became a reference to the villain and not the hero. I wonder who they were trying to get out there for not doing it. Anyway, in 1958, Fernando Osesis, a wrestler and actor, invited Santo to work in movies. And although Santo was unwilling to give up his wrestling career, he accepted planning to do both at the same time. Oses was planning on playing the hero, a masked cop named El Incognito, in these 2 films, with Santo appearing as his costume sidekick, El Enmascarado. Now, Fernando Oses and Enrique Zambrano wrote the scripts for the first 2 movies, translated are The Evil Brain and The Infernal Man, both released in 1958 and directed by Rodriguez. Filming was done in Cuba and ended just the day before Fidel Castro entered Havana and declared the victory of the revolution. So they got out just in time. Santo played a masked superhero type sidekick to the main hero, who was called El Incognito in these 2 films. And he was not the main character, nor was he depicted as a wrestler in these 2 films, rather as a masked police agent of some sort. He just spent the whole film wearing a mask and no one asked why. The films did poorly at the box office when they were released. Years later, however, when Santo's film career took off, the distributors of these 2 films quietly added Santo's name into the titles. Most people feel Santo's film career really took off in 1961 with what became his 3rd movie, Santo versus the Zombies. Santo was given the starring role with this film and was named for the first time as a professional wrestler who was moonlighting as a superhero. Santo would eventually end up appearing in 52 Lucha Libre films. two of which were just cameo appearances, though. The style of these movies was essentially the same throughout the series, with Santo as a superhero crime fighter battling creatures, evil scientists, various criminal gangs, secret agents, Dracula, Royal Eagles, and all sorts of stuff. He is best known outside of Mexico in what became a bit of a cult film, 1962's Santo versus the Vampire Women, which was also featured in an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Go and check that out. In the movie, the production values were better than they had been in previous attempts, and there was an attempt of creating more of a mythos and background for Santo as the last of a long line of superheroes. It was an enormous success at the box office. Only four of the 52 Santo films were ever dubbed in English originally, the other 48 being only available in Spanish. Santo's most financially successful film, though, was The Mummies of Guanajuato, which co-starred Blue Demon and Mil Mascares. Many Mexi movie fans consider this the greatest luchador film ever made. The Santo film series inspired the production of similar series of movie titles starring other well-known luchadors such as Blue Demon, Mil Mascares, Super Zan, and the Wrestling Woman, among others. Santo even co-starred with Blue Demon and Mil Mascares in several other movies. When Blue Demon invited Santo to co-star with him in Mil Mascares in the Champions of Justice movie trilogy, however, Santo was too busy making other films to participate. By 1977, the mass wrestling film craze had practically died off, but Santo did continue to appear in more films over the next few years. His last film was Fury of the Karate Experts, which was shot in Florida in 1982, the very same year he retired from the ring. By the early 1980s, El Santo had slowed down his in-ring activities, leading up to the inevitable retirement. His farewell tour was announced from August and September 1982. The first of three events took place on August the 22nd, 1982, at the Palacio de los Deportes in Mexico City. On that night, El Santo teamed up with El Solitario to take on Villano Free and Rocambole in a match that naturally saw the legends win. After the match, Villano and Rocambole lifted El Santo up on their shoulders and he received adulation from the sold out arena. They knew that they saw something special that night. They knew this would never be replicated and they paid their respects to the legend. The following Sunday, El Santo appeared at Arena Mexico, where he teamed up with Gran Hamada to defeat Villano 1 and Scorpio Jr. Santo's last match, though, took place on September the 12th, 1982, a week before his 65th birthday. In his last match ever, El Santo teamed up with Goy Guerrero, who came out of retirement to reform La Pareja Atomica as they teamed up against Hurricane Ramirez and El Solidario. Their opponents included one of El Santo's biggest rivals, Impero Aguayo, as well as El Signo, Negro Navarro, and El Texano. True to the legend of El Santo, he won his last match and retired as the hero he always portrayed in the ring and on screen. His retirement tour was also used to introduce Santo's son George as the next generation El Santo, as he was ringside at each show wearing the silver mask and being introduced as El Hijo del Santo. He would go on to have a fantastic career himself, only recently retiring this year. Just over a year after El Santo's retirement in late January 1984, El Santo was a guest on Contrapunto, a Mexican television program, and completely without warning removed his mask just enough to expose his face, in effect, bidding his fans goodbye. It's the only documented case ever of Santo removing his mask in public. Although later there were reports that he was unhappy with the fact that he wanted to do it as a quick flash and the TV cameras sort of did a freeze frame of him, so it revealed a little bit more than he intended. And I think he felt a bit disappointed in that in hindsight. And his son has mentioned that too in different interviews. But at the time, it was shocking. It was a farewell to the fans, and it would be the last time El Santo was seen on television, as he died from a heart attack during a stage show he was putting on February the 5th, 1984 at 9:40 p.m., a week after his Contrapunto TV appearance. he was 66 years old. As per his wishes, he was buried wearing his famous silver mask. His funeral is considered one of the biggest in Mexican history as fans and friends flooded to see El Enmascarado de Plata, the silver masked one final time. After his death, a statue of El Santo was erected in his hometown, Tulancingo, and other statues have since been created across Mexico. 17 years after Santo's death, his real life son, as I say, known as El Hijo de Santo, played the lead role in a brand new Santo movie called Infraterrestra in 2001, which also co-starred the famous Mexican luchador, the Blue Panther. The legend of El Santo lives on to this very day, both inside and outside the wrestling ring. Santo's son carries the mask as El Hijo del Santo, and that has now been passed on to his son as well. So the legacy continues. There's a third generation of El Santo out there fighting now, wearing the silver mask and cape and outfit that is very close to what his father and grandfather wore. But there will always only be one El Santo, one person who brought Mexico to a standstill on the day of his funeral, one name that Mexican wrestling Lucha Libre fans will always hold high above the other. And we salute that legend. So thank you for joining us this week. This is a short but sweet one where we took a look in a legend of the grappling game from around the globe. We thank you for joining us. I've been your host, Brett Summers, and say new episodes drop every Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. You can check them out on our YouTube channel where you can watch along. Or if you want to listen, you can go on to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, and all the usual podcast places that are out there. Give us a like, give us a listen, like and share below and all that. Click the link, enable notifications. You know what to do. And please share us. Please tell people about us. All that stuff really helps. Likes, reviews, comments. It really does make a big deal to us as we try and spread our global gospel of grappling. We'll be back next week with another guest. So stay safe and stay on the mats.